The hardest goodbye is not the one where someone walks away. It is the one where they stay in your heart for years, even when you know you are supposed to forget them. 5 years ago, Ethan Parker believed he had finally learned how to move on. He had learned how to smile when people asked about the past. He had learned how to change the subject whenever someone mentioned Noah Bennett. He had learned how to live with the quiet space left behind by the one person who once made the world feel less lonely. At 27 years old, Ethan had built a simple life in Chicago, Illinois. He worked as a book illustrator, spending his days creating colorful worlds for children who still believed in impossible things. It was ironic, he thought sometimes, because he was the one who stopped believing in impossible things a long time ago, especially when it came to love. His apartment was small but warm, filled with plants by the windows, stacks of sketchbooks on the shelves, and little reminders of a life he had carefully created on his own. He told himself he was happy. Most days, he even believed it. Until the envelope arrived. There was nothing unusual about the invitation at first. Cream-colored paper, elegant handwriting, a familiar name. But the moment Ethan saw those words, the room seemed to become quieter. Noah Bennett. After 5 years of silence, 5 years of unanswered questions, 5 years of pretending he did not care, Noah was suddenly back in his life. Ethan read the invitation twice, then a third time, not because he did not understand the words, but because he wished they could mean something different. He had expected many things if Noah ever returned. An apology, an explanation, maybe even a simple conversation. He never expected to see Noah's name connected to a wedding. The strange part was that Ethan was not even invited as a guest. He was invited as the designer for the new home Noah was building. A professional opportunity. Nothing more. Ethan almost laughed at the cruelty of it. The universe had a strange sense of humor. After all these years, he was being asked to help create the perfect home for the man who once felt like home himself. He wanted to refuse. Every logical thought told him to send back a polite message and walk away. But his hand hovered over the acceptance button longer than he wanted to admit. Because deep down, beneath all the hurt and all the distance, there was still a part of him that wondered one impossible question. Why now? Why did Noah come back? And why did his heart still react like no time had passed at all? The next morning, Ethan arrived at the construction site with his portfolio in hand and his emotions carefully hidden behind a calm expression. The building stood unfinished beneath the gray Chicago sky, surrounded by wooden frames, blueprints, and the sound of workers preparing the future. Then he saw him. Noah Bennett stood across the room, exactly as Ethan remembered, and completely different at the same time. Dark hair, gray eyes, and that familiar quiet expression that always made Ethan wonder what he was thinking. For a moment, neither of them moved. 5 years disappeared in a single glance. Noah looked like he wanted to say something. Ethan looked like he was ready not to listen. But both of them knew the truth they had spent years avoiding. Some connections do not disappear. They simply wait for the courage to be faced again. The strange thing about seeing someone from your past is that your memory never prepares you for the real person standing in front of you. Ethan had imagined this moment countless times over the years. Sometimes he imagined Noah apologizing. Sometimes he imagined himself walking away without feeling anything. But reality was nothing like those dreams. Reality was Noah Bennett standing only a few feet away, looking at him like he was trying to find the right words in a conversation they had both been avoiding for half a decade. Ethan, Noah finally said, his voice quieter than Ethan remembered. Just hearing his name from Noah's lips felt unfair. 5 years had passed, but that single word carried the weight of every unfinished conversation. Ethan adjusted the folder in his hands and forced himself to focus on business. The design plans are ready. I brought a few options for the interior layout. Professional, calm, distant. Those were the rules Ethan had created for himself before arriving. Noah nodded, but his eyes stayed on him a little longer than necessary. You still organize everything with color tabs. Ethan looked down at the folder. He had not even realized Noah noticed. Some things do not change, Ethan replied. The words sounded simple, but they carried a meaning neither of them ignored. They walked through the unfinished house together, discussing measurements, lighting, and furniture choices. Ethan tried to see Noah only as a client. It was easier when they talked about walls and windows. It was easier when they focused on the future instead of the past. But Noah remembered everything. He remembered that Ethan preferred warm lighting because bright rooms made him feel uncomfortable. He remembered that Ethan always chose wooden details because they made a place feel alive. He remembered tiny things that Ethan had convinced himself nobody noticed. "You still remember all of that?" Ethan asked before he could stop himself. Noah paused. For a moment, the confident architect disappeared, and Ethan saw the person he used to know. The person who used to stay awake with him during late nights, listening to every dream and every fear. "I remember more than I should," Noah said softly. The answer caught Ethan off guard. He looked away, pretending to study the blueprint in his hands. Because admitting that he remembered too would mean admitting that some part of him had never really moved on. As the afternoon passed, the distance between them became harder to maintain. Every familiar habit, every small gesture, every unfinished sentence reminded Ethan that Noah was not a stranger. He was someone who once knew him better than anyone. Someone who left without saying goodbye. When the meeting ended, Noah walked Ethan to the entrance. The Chicago evening air was cool, and the city lights had started appearing between the buildings. "Thank you for taking this project," Noah said. Ethan nodded. "It is just work." Noah looked like he wanted to disagree, but he stopped himself. Instead, he simply said, "I am glad you came." Ethan walked away without answering. But as he reached his car, he realized something that scared him more than seeing Noah again. The hardest part was not remembering how much he had loved him. The hardest part was realizing he still cared. Ethan had always believed distance made things easier. That was what everyone said. Time passed, wounds healed, and eventually the memories became softer. But standing across from Noah again made Ethan realize that some memories did not fade. They simply waited quietly until the right moment to return. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and Noah continued working together on the house project. They met several times a week, reviewing designs, choosing furniture, and discussing small details that would turn an empty building into a home. Ethan told himself it was only professional. He repeated that thought every morning before arriving at the construction site. It was only work. It was only a project. It was only Noah. But the problem was that Noah never felt like only anything. He had always been the person who noticed the things everyone else missed. One afternoon, Ethan arrived with a cup of coffee in his hand and stopped when he saw another cup already waiting on the table. "I remembered you still order cinnamon with extra cream," Noah said. Ethan stared at the drink. 5 years ago, that small detail would have made him smile. Now it only made his chest feel heavy. "You should not remember things like that," Ethan said quietly. Noah looked at him. "Why?" Ethan looked away. Because remembering meant caring. And caring was dangerous. The truth was that Ethan had spent years convincing himself Noah left because he did not love him enough. That explanation hurt, but it was easier than accepting another possibility. What if Noah left because he was afraid? What if both of them had been running from the same fear? Later that day, while reviewing old documents for the renovation, Ethan found a small note attached to one of Noah's original sketches. It was nothing important, just a simple reminder about the type of sunlight Noah wanted in the living room. But underneath the design notes were words written in Noah's handwriting. A place should feel safe enough for someone to finally stop pretending. Ethan read the sentence twice. He wondered if Noah wrote it years ago, before everything changed. He wondered if Noah had been talking about the house or something much more personal. When Ethan looked up, Noah was watching him from across the room. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. There were too many things between them that had never been said. That evening, Noah offered to drive Ethan home because heavy rain had started covering the streets of Chicago. Ethan almost refused. Almost. But exhaustion won, and he accepted. Inside the quiet car, the silence between them felt different. It was not uncomfortable. It felt familiar. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if things were different?" Noah asked softly. Ethan looked out at the rain moving across the window. He wanted to say no. He wanted to protect himself. But lying had never been easy with Noah. "Sometimes," Ethan admitted. Noah nodded slowly. "Me too." 2 simple words. Yet they carried years of regret, memories, and feelings neither of them had been brave enough to face. When Noah stopped outside Ethan's apartment, neither of them moved immediately. For a moment, the past and present existed together. The person Ethan lost was sitting beside him, but the person he missed was still there too. And for the first time in years, Ethan wondered if their story had truly ended, or if they had only been waiting for the courage to continue it. Ethan had spent 5 years believing that unanswered questions eventually stopped hurting. He was wrong. Some questions did not disappear. They simply became quieter, waiting for the person who caused them to return. After the night Noah drove him home, Ethan found himself thinking about things he had carefully buried. The way Noah looked at him before saying goodbye. The way his voice changed when he admitted he wondered what could have been different. The way, after all this time, it still felt like Noah understood him without needing an explanation. But there was one thing Ethan could not ignore. Noah was building a new life. At least, that was what everyone believed. A few days later, Ethan arrived at the studio with updated designs for the house. He expected another normal meeting. He expected polite conversations about materials and layouts. Instead, he noticed something strange when he entered Noah's office. On the desk was a wedding magazine open to a page filled with elegant venues and expensive decorations. Ethan froze for a moment before forcing himself to look away. "Everything looks great," Noah said as he walked in. "You have always been good at creating spaces that feel personal." Ethan placed the folder down. "I am glad you like it." Noah studied his expression. "Something is wrong." Ethan almost smiled at the familiar words. Noah had always been able to notice when something bothered him. Even after 5 years, he still saw through him. "Nothing is wrong," Ethan replied. It was the same answer people gave when everything was wrong. Noah did not push. That was one of the things Ethan remembered most about him. Noah never forced people to open up. He simply stayed close enough until they were ready. And somehow, that made leaving even more painful. Later that afternoon, Ethan overheard a conversation between two employees outside the meeting room. They were discussing Noah's upcoming wedding plans. They mentioned family expectations, business connections, and how complicated everything had become. Ethan stopped listening after that. He did not need more details. The message was clear. Noah was moving forward. Ethan returned to the design table and focused on his work, but his hands felt heavier than usual. He had spent years telling himself that Noah leaving meant he had not been chosen. Now he wondered if there had been an entire story he never knew. That evening, Noah found Ethan sitting alone in the unfinished living room of the house. The sunset poured through the empty windows, painting the floor with golden light. "You are still here," Noah said softly. Ethan looked up. "I was finishing the final notes." Noah nodded, but he did not leave. "Ethan, there is something I should have told you a long time ago." The room became silent. Ethan felt his heartbeat change. He had waited years for an explanation, but now that the moment had arrived, he was afraid of what it might reveal. Noah took a breath. "When I left, it was not because I stopped caring." Ethan looked at him, unable to hide the emotion in his eyes. For years, he had wondered if he had imagined everything they shared. Noah's voice became quieter. "You were the hardest person to leave behind." And in that moment, Ethan realized the truth he had never allowed himself to consider. Maybe the goodbye that broke them was never caused by a lack of love. Maybe it was caused by two people who were both too afraid to hold on. Ethan had spent years imagining what he would say if Noah ever explained why he left. In every version of that conversation, Ethan was prepared. He would stay calm. He would ask the right questions. He would protect his heart. But now that Noah was finally standing in front of him, admitting that leaving had never been about losing feelings, Ethan felt completely unprepared. The unfinished living room around them was quiet except for the soft sound of rain against the windows. It felt strangely familiar, like the kind of evening they used to spend together when the world outside did not matter. "Why did you leave without saying goodbye?" Ethan asked. His voice was steady, but his eyes carried everything he had tried to hide. Noah looked down for a moment. For the first time since Ethan had seen him again, Noah did not look like the successful architect everyone admired. He looked like the person who had been carrying a secret for years. "Because I thought staying would hurt you more." Ethan frowned. How could leaving hurt less? Noah closed his eyes briefly, as if remembering every moment he wished he could change. 5 years earlier, Noah had been struggling with pressure from his family and expectations he never talked about. His career was uncertain. His future felt impossible to control. And through all of that, Ethan had been the one person who made everything feel simple. That was exactly what scared him. Noah believed Ethan deserved someone who could give him stability, someone who would not bring confusion into his life. So instead of trusting Ethan enough to let him choose, Noah made the choice for both of them. "I thought I was protecting you," Noah said quietly. "But I was really just afraid." Ethan looked away. The words hurt because they made sense. He remembered the small signs he ignored back then. The hesitation in Noah's voice. The sadness behind his smile. The way Noah looked at him like he wanted to say something, but never found the courage. "You should have told me," Ethan whispered. Noah nodded. "I know." There was no excuse in his voice. No attempt to make himself the victim. Only regret. That honesty made Ethan's anger harder to hold on to. Because the person he missed was still there. The same Noah who remembered his favorite coffee. The same Noah who noticed when he was overwhelmed. The same Noah who always cared, even when he was too afraid to admit it. "Are you happy now?" Ethan asked after a long silence. Noah hesitated. It was a small pause, but Ethan noticed. He always noticed Noah. "I have built a life," Noah answered. "But that does not mean I have forgotten the person I lost." The words stayed between them. Ethan wanted to ask more. He wanted to know everything. But fear still existed between them, just like it had 5 years ago. The difference was that this time, neither of them walked away. They stood there, surrounded by unfinished walls and unfinished feelings, finally facing the truth they had both avoided. Their story had never been about forgetting each other. It had always been about learning how to be brave enough to remember. For the first time in 5 years, Ethan felt like he was standing in the middle of a door that had been closed for too long. Behind him was the life he had built without Noah. In front of him was the person who had once been the center of everything. And the hardest part was realizing that he did not know which direction he wanted to go. After their conversation at the unfinished house, things between Ethan and Noah changed. They were not suddenly fixed. They were not magically the same people they had been before. Too much time had passed for that. But the silence between them was different. It no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a space waiting to be filled. Over the next few days, they continued working on the project together. Ethan noticed small things he had forgotten about Noah. The way he always arrived early and prepared everything before a meeting. The way he listened carefully before giving an answer. The way he still looked at Ethan as if every word mattered. But Ethan also noticed something else. Noah was tired. Not physically, but emotionally. The confident man everyone admired seemed to disappear whenever they talked about the past. One evening, while reviewing the final design choices, Ethan found an old folder hidden among the blueprints. Inside were early sketches of the house from years ago. He recognized the handwriting immediately. Noah had drawn ideas for a place filled with sunlight, open spaces, and small details that made people feel comfortable. At the bottom of one page was a sentence written in black ink. "A home is not about where you live. It is about who you can be yourself with." Ethan stared at the words for a long time. Because he remembered that conversation. They had been sitting in a small cafe near Lake Michigan, talking about their dreams. Noah wanted to build homes. Ethan wanted to create stories. They had promised each other that one day they would create something meaningful together. Before life became complicated. Before fear became stronger than hope. Noah found him holding the folder. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You kept these?" Ethan asked. Noah looked at the sketches. "I could not throw them away." Ethan swallowed. "Even after you left?" Noah nodded slowly. "Especially after I left." The honesty in his voice made Ethan look away. Because a part of him wanted to be angry. A part of him wanted Noah to feel the same emptiness he had felt. But another part of him remembered the person Noah had always been. Someone who cared deeply but struggled to show it. "I thought you moved on," Ethan admitted. Noah was quiet for a moment. "I tried." Those 2 words carried more meaning than a long explanation. Ethan looked back at him. "Did it work?" Noah smiled sadly. "No." The room became quiet again, but this time the silence did not feel painful. It felt honest. 2 people who had spent years pretending they were fine were finally admitting. They were not. And maybe that was the beginning of something neither of them expected. Not a return to the past. Not an attempt to recreate what they lost. But a chance to build something new from the pieces they were brave enough to face. Ethan had spent years believing that the hardest part of losing Noah was the goodbye. But now he understood something different. The hardest part was realizing that the person he missed was still standing in front of him, carrying the same feelings he had tried so hard to forget. The days that followed were filled with small moments that felt strangely familiar. Ethan and Noah continued working on the house, but their conversations slowly became less about designs and more about the lives they had lived apart. They talked about their careers, their dreams, and the simple things they had never shared with anyone else. Ethan learned that Noah still kept the old coffee mug Ethan gave him years ago. Noah learned that Ethan still visited the same bookstore cafe where they used to spend rainy afternoons together. Neither of them mentioned how much those details meant. They did not need to. Some truths existed in the quiet. But Ethan still carried one fear that refused to disappear. What if he opened his heart again and Noah left another time? One evening, while reviewing the final changes for the house, Ethan finally asked the question he had been avoiding. Why did you come back now? Noah looked surprised by the honesty in his voice. For a moment, he studied the empty room around them. The walls were unfinished, the furniture had not arrived, and everything was still waiting to become something more. Because I realized I spent years building everything except the one thing I actually wanted, Noah answered. Ethan looked at him. And what was that? Noah smiled slightly, but there was sadness behind it. A place where I could stop pretending I was fine without you. The answer stayed with Ethan. Because he understood that feeling better than anyone. He had spent years creating a life that looked complete from the outside, while secretly wondering what would have happened if Noah had stayed. But love was not the only thing that had changed. They had changed too. They were no longer the two people who were too afraid to speak honestly. They were older. They had learned what loneliness felt like. They had learned that protecting someone by pushing them away could still cause pain. I am scared, Ethan admitted. Noah did not look away. Me too. The simple honesty surprised Ethan. He expected promises. He expected perfect words. Instead, Noah gave him something much more valuable. The truth. I do not know how to fix the years we lost, Noah said. But I know I do not want to lose any more time. Ethan looked around the unfinished house and thought about everything they had built separately. The walls they created. The distance they allowed. The fears they carried. Maybe love was never about finding someone who had no flaws or fears. Maybe it was about finding someone willing to face those fears with you. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to imagine a future that included Noah. Not the past they could not change. Not the memories they could not recover. But something new. Something honest. Something they both had the courage to choose. The final weeks of the house project felt different from the beginning. At first, Ethan and Noah had walked through the unfinished rooms like strangers trying to remember a language they once spoke. Now, those same rooms carried conversations they had avoided for years. Every corner seemed to hold a memory. Every window showed them a possibility. But even as they grew closer again, Ethan knew there was still one thing standing between them. Fear. Not the fear of losing feelings. Not the fear of being forgotten. It was the fear of believing again. One afternoon, Ethan arrived at the house and found Noah standing in the living room, looking at the completed designs spread across the table. The space was almost finished. The empty walls that once surrounded silence were slowly becoming a real home. You did an amazing job, Noah said. Ethan smiled softly. We did. The word surprised both of them. We. It was such a small word, but it carried everything they had been trying not to say. Noah looked at him. I missed hearing you say things like that. Ethan looked down at the plans. I missed a lot of things. The honesty between them was becoming easier, but easier did not mean simple. There were still moments when Ethan remembered the pain of being left behind. There were still moments when Noah worried that one mistake from the past would always define him. That evening, they sat together outside the house, watching the city lights appear one by one across Chicago. The conversation was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that felt comfortable. Do you ever wish we had met at a different time? Ethan asked. Noah thought about it. Sometimes. Ethan looked surprised. Noah continued. But then I think about everything we learned. Maybe we were not ready back then. Ethan looked at the street below. And now? Noah turned toward him. Now I know that being afraid does not mean you should run. Those words stayed with Ethan. Because they were the exact lesson they both needed to learn. For years, they had mistaken fear for a reason to let go. They thought protecting their hearts meant keeping distance. But distance had not protected them. It had only made them miss each other quietly. I cannot promise that I will never be scared again, Ethan admitted. Noah smiled. I cannot either. Ethan looked at him. Then what do we do? Noah answered without hesitation. We stay. Simple. Honest. Real. Not a dramatic promise. Not a perfect solution. Just a choice. The kind of choice they should have made years ago. As the evening continued, Ethan realized something important. The person sitting beside him was not the same person who left 5 years ago. And Ethan was not the same person who waited for an explanation. They had both grown. They had both changed. Maybe that was why they had a chance now. They were not trying to return to the past. They were creating something new. Something stronger because it had survived distance, silence, and fear. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan did not feel like he was waiting for Noah to leave. He felt like Noah was finally choosing to stay. Months later, the house that once stood unfinished had become a place filled with warmth, memories, and a future neither Ethan nor Noah had expected. The empty rooms that once carried years of silence now held the sound of laughter, conversations, and two people finally allowing themselves to be honest. Ethan stood near the living room window, looking at the space he had helped create. The sunlight came through the glass exactly the way Noah had imagined years ago. Soft, calm, welcoming. A place where someone could finally feel at home. "You are thinking too much again," Noah said from behind him. Ethan smiled because some things truly never changed. Noah still knew when his mind was somewhere else. "Maybe," Ethan replied. "I was just remembering how different everything looked when we first came here." Noah walked beside him and looked around the room. "Back then, it was just a building." Ethan nodded. "Now it feels like something else." Noah smiled softly. "Because it is." There was a time when Ethan believed their story ended the day Noah left. He believed some endings were permanent. He believed certain people only came into your life to teach you something before disappearing. But standing there, he understood that some stories were not finished when people walked away. Sometimes they were only waiting for both people to become ready. Their relationship was not perfect. They still had difficult conversations. They still had moments when old fears appeared. But now they faced those moments together instead of separately. They had learned that love was not about never being afraid. It was about choosing someone even when fear was present. 1 year after the house was completed, Ethan published his first illustrated novel. During the book launch, Noah stood quietly in the crowd, watching Ethan talk about his work with the same passion he always had. Afterward, Ethan found him outside the bookstore cafe, where they had once spent countless afternoons dreaming about the future. "You came," Ethan said. Noah smiled. "I would not miss it." Ethan looked at him and thought about all the time they lost. 5 years of unanswered messages. 5 years of pretending they were fine. 5 years of carrying feelings they never had the courage to express. But he also thought about everything they gained. The patience, the understanding, the ability to choose each other with open eyes. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we never met again?" Ethan asked. Noah looked at him for a moment. "Yes." Ethan waited for the answer. Noah smiled gently. "But I am more grateful that we did." And that was the truth. They were not the same two people who fell in love years ago. They were better because they had learned what it meant to lose something valuable and still find the courage to reach for it again. The past would always be part of their story, but it was no longer the place where they lived. They had finally built something beyond fear, something beyond regret, something they both chose every single day.